Hello, class! Welcome to another learning episode in Reading and Writing Academy. I am beyond excited for another practical and useful lesson prepared for you, my senior high school readers and writers. So, sit tight and set your mind to these fun-filled and meaningful learning opportunities with me. I am your teacher Eileen, who will be your learning facilitator in today's session. I hope you're already in a comfortable place and wearing your proper attire. And what do I always remind you to do before tuning into our episode? You really are attentive. Always fill your stomach, get yourself clean, and seek the Lord's guidance. Did you already do these things? I am sure you do. Now, grab your pen and paper and make sure that you'll take good notes. Before we'll proceed to our discussion, let's have a short recap on what transpired in your previous lesson. The world is full of patterns. By looking at these patterns, we can easily determine things and their purposes. Do you agree with me? In writing, there's also a pattern. Our topic has been focusing on patterns of development, or we say writing development. We have already discussed narration, description, definition, and exemplification or classification. If you recall, an effective communication begins with a clearly organized set of ideas following a logical, consistent pattern. Whether you belong to an academic track, TVL, sports, or art and design track, these lessons are designed for you to master your skill in distinguishing between and among patterns of development for effective writing across the disciplines. Today's learning competency focuses on distinguishing between and among patterns of development in writing across disciplines, specifically using comparison and contrast pattern. You are expected to find out the features of comparison and contrast pattern. Write a short paragraph following the comparison and contrast in various disciplines. Express one's insight about various life's events and circumstances, and appreciate similarities and differences of one's personality and background. And for the continuation of our lesson, gear up as we enter another dimension of writing development pattern. Are you excited? As we start, let me bring you to a virtual tour in an art gallery exhibit. Sounds exciting, right? Get on your feet and let's get started. The first stop is the photography section. Well, photography is the art or process of producing images by the action of radiant energy and especially light on a sensitive surface. Take a look on these pictures. What do you think is the underlying concept among this? Perfect! They are showing contrast. These images are patterned with the element of contrast. As a principle of art, contrast refers to the arrangement of opposite elements and effects. For example, light and dark colors, smooth and rough textures, large and small shapes. And contrast can be used to create variety, visual interest, and drama in an artwork. But did you know that using contrast is also an essential feature in developing your writing skill? Let me bring you to our next stop for today. We're now here at the National Library. This library is notable for being the home of the original copies of defining works of Jose Rizal, such as Noli Me Tangere, El Filibusterismo, and Mi Ultimo Adios. Interesting, by the way. Have you visited the school library before pandemic? What were the books you used to read during the old normal? How about during the lockdown? Have you continued your passion in reading? In what way did you sustain your hobby? Oops, did I ask too much? Anyway, these questions have something to do to the principle of contrast which I have mentioned earlier. So stay put and keep on listening. Today's session is centered on one of the most effective patterns to develop your paragraphs, and this is the comparison and contrast. Comparison in writing discusses elements that are similar, while contrast in writing discusses elements or ideas that are different. A compare and contrast essay then analyzes two subjects, comparing them, contrasting them, or both. However, its purpose is not to simply state the obvious, but rather to illustrate subtle differences or unexpected similarities between two subjects. If you wanted to focus on contrasting two subjects, you would not pick this book and this newspaper, because obviously these are two different reading materials. Rather, you might choose to compare and contrast two types of books or two types of publication to highlight their subtle differences. Drawing distinctions between elements in similar category will increase the audience's understanding of that category, which is the purpose of the compare and contrast essay. As a writer, you should help the readers see how these two ideas are similar or different by showing them its advantages and disadvantages, so they are able to weigh the pros and cons before they make judgment or decision. Usually, we use Venn diagram in enumerating the result over comparison and contrast before we proceed developing our paragraphs. And since we're still here in the library, I want you to watch this video clip as library sources and internet sources are being compared. As you watch, I want you to notice how library and internet are being compared. So, grab your pen and jot down the words and phrases that show similarities and differences between library and internet as sources of information. You may also use a Venn diagram if you wish. Are you ready?
cartoon.
Alright, I guess you're done. Using these sources are both important factors that can contribute in enhancing your literacy and research skills. The more you read, whether from printed books and digital articles, the more you can improve your comprehension abilities. Also, you are broadening your knowledge, which can be a big help in doing some research stuffs. Isn't it that in doing your practical research, you need to infer and explain patterns and themes from data and to relate the findings with your pertinent literature? Indeed, carefully planning your references and data collection strategies can be really useful in the process. Now, let's see if you were able to come up with the same highlights of comparison and contrast from the video.
Library sources includes printed sources, usually found at the library, basically books, encyclopedia, dictionary, journals, and newspapers. While internet sources are sources that you can find online and can be called electronic sources, online sources, or web sources. And for the advantages of library sources, it can access vast array of resources, it can trust the sources, organize tools and resources, and research that is not available elsewhere. While for the internet, it has many advantages for being a source. It is easy to use, provides reading club with audio and video, and provides interaction, greater penetration, and can be accessed anytime. Well, for their similarities, both are sources of information, of course. Information can come from different parts of the world, and it is open to anyone who has the access.
Do you have the same answer? That was amazing! And for you to further enhance your knowledge, let us analyze the features of this pattern. Actually, there are two common ways to organize comparison and contrast paragraph or essay. These are the block method and point-by-point comparison.
The block method is used to compare and contrast two subjects one at a time. You may begin by saying everything you have to say about the first subject you are discussing, then move on and write everything about your second subject. If you are writing a short paragraph or essay, you might be able to fit all your points about each item. However, if you would want to address one subject at a time, you may use point-by-point comparison.
Let's have the following articles and try to identify which one shows block method and which one uses point-by-point comparison.
There are various examples of 21st century literary genres based on their elements, structures, and traditions. Two of the most common genres are hyperpoetry and spoken poetry. Hyperpoetry is also called as cyberpoetry. It could not be presented without the aid of computers. This includes verse with links to sub-poems or footnotes, poetry generators, or poetry with movement or images. On the other hand, spoken poetry is a poetry intended for on-stage performance, rather than exclusively designed for the page. While often associated with hip-hop culture, it also has strong ties to storytelling, modern poetry, postmodern performance, and monologue theater, as well as jazz, blues, and folk music. Similarly, both types of poetry are categorized under contemporary literature since they reflect current trends in life and culture where readers can easily relate to the poet's insights about various life's events and circumstances.
I guess that article reminded you about finding the differences and similarities of various 21st century literary genres and their elements, structures, and traditions from across the globe. This time, let's proceed to the second text. This text will give you the gist of the features of media literacy, information literacy, and technology literacy, as explained through comparison and contrast.
Media literacy, information literacy, and technology literacy are all similar in terms of goals. They all share the common goal of cultivating people's ability to access, understand, use, evaluate, and create media messages, information, or content using information technology. In the same fashion, they all aim to the mastery and understanding of a thing. Specifically, media literacy uses forms of communication and produces ways of communication focusing on media content. In contrast, information literacy is using, managing, gathering, and verifying information which focuses on library science. Conversely, technology literacy is applying newfound knowledge from digital environments, participating in digital media, organizing and evaluating information. In terms of its purpose, students learn how to evaluate the quality, credibility, validity of websites and give proper credit from effective search strategies to evaluation techniques through media literacy. Whereas technology literacy helps learners to communicate, solve problems, and enhance lifelong learning skills for future progress. Unlike for media literacy, it builds an understanding of the role of the media in society as well as essential skills of inquiry and self-expression needed for democratic citizens.
Were you able to determine the differences of the strategies used in these selections? Yes, you must. As a reader, you must be critical enough on how authors develop their paragraphs as well as determining the pattern used. By the way, which among the paragraphs utilize about block method? Is it the article about 21st century literary genre or the article discussing the similarities and differences of literacy types? That's awesome! Article 1 shows block method and Article 2 uses point-by-point comparison. See? It's easy for you to determine the strategy. Therefore, it will also be easier for you to make use of this pattern. The organizational structure you choose depends on the nature of the topic, your purpose, and your audience. Given that compare and contrast essays analyze the relationship between two subjects, it is helpful to have some phrases on hand that will cue the readers to such analysis. Let's have some of these keywords, or we call them the transition words, emphasizing comparison and contrast.
The words or phrases that show comparison are one similarity, another similarity, both, like, likewise, similarly, and in a similar fashion. While words that show contrast are one difference, another difference, conversely, in contrast, unlike, while, and whereas.
Going back to the text, let us find the transitional words that we have just encountered.
There are various examples of 21st century literary genres based on their elements, structures, and traditions. Two of the most common genres are hyperpoetry and spoken poetry. Hyperpoetry is also called as cyberpoetry. It could not be presented without the aid of computers. This includes verse with links to subpoems or footnotes, poetry generators, or poetry with movement or images. On the other hand, spoken poetry is a poetry intended for on-stage performance, rather than exclusively designed for the page. While often associated with hip-hop culture, it also has strong ties to storytelling, modern poetry, postmodern performance and monologue theater, as well as jazz, blues, and folk music. Similarly, both types of poetry are categorized under contemporary literature since they reflect current trends in life and culture where readers can easily relate to the poet's insights about various life's events and circumstances. Media literacy, information literacy, and technology literacy are all similar in terms of goals. They all share the common goal of cultivating people's ability to access, understand, use, evaluate, and create media messages, information, or content using information technology. In the same fashion, they all aim to the mastery and understanding of a thing. Specifically, media literacy uses forms of communication and produces ways of communication focusing on media content. In contrast, information literacy is using, managing, gathering, and verifying information which focuses on library science. Conversely, technology literacy is applying newfound knowledge from digital environments, participating in digital media, organizing and evaluating information. In terms of its purpose, students learn how to evaluate the quality, credibility, validity of websites and give proper credit from effective search strategies to evaluation techniques through media literacy. Whereas technology literacy helps learners to communicate, solve problems, and enhance lifelong learning skills for future progress. Unlike for media literacy, it builds an understanding of the role of the media in society as well as essential skills of inquiry and self-expression needed for democratic citizens.
That's amazing! You are really doing well, my senior high school learners. From the text, we use the words on the other hand, while, similarly, in the same fashion, in contrast, conversely, and unlike. And I guess you are now ready for a short activity. But wait, I am feeling hungry and it's wrong to eat at the library. This time, let's leave this place and look for something to eat. With the important concepts that you have learned about developing your paragraph using the comparison and contrast as a writing pattern, always remember the two strategies that we can use. What are they again? That's right, we have the block and point by point method. We can use either of these strategies in pointing our similarities and differences of certain topics. Also, keep in mind the clue words that we can always use whether we are writing for medical topics, arts and crafts impressions, societal issues, or even sports reflection. What matters is we are focused on the writing pattern that we opt to use and effectively write across various disciplines. And speaking of developing our points using comparison and contrast, always remember, my dear learners, that we are bounded with limitations when we are pointing our similarities and differences. It's a good thing to learn how to compare and contrast ideas, but in our personal lives and decisions, let us not compare ourselves to others at all times because it may just lower our self-esteem. Let us be proud of our unique personalities because nobody is born exactly the same. At times, what we also need is to respect our differences since we have different cultural background and tradition. And one best way is by looking at the beauty of unity amid diversity. That idea really made me hungry. I really want to eat now. By the way, do you practice a healthy eating habit? Did you know that people have different eating habits? To learn more, let me share with you this text.
Eating is important, but each of us has preference in the type of food we chose and the way we eat. There are types of eating we should know of and understand. The first is fueling for performance, as athletes follow a structured diet for good body composition, athletic performance, and recovery. While the second type is emotional eating. This is habitually consuming large amount of food in response to emotions instead of hunger. Emotional eaters see food as a source of comfort, stress reliever, or reward to make one feel better. On the other hand, athletes eat a balanced diet of carbohydrates, protein, fats, minerals, and vitamins to be effective in their performances. Similarly, eating is important, but we must learn to manage it properly. Too much or too little food consumed isn't healthy. It is better to maintain a balanced diet and healthy lifestyle to prevent illness.
This text was taken from an article from your physical education class, so please be reminded on your proper eating habits. What did you notice with this paragraph? Correct! The topic is all about eating habits that serve as its main idea. What were the two habits being compared in this article? Perfect! We have seen the differences between eating as fueling for performance and emotional eating. Did you see some clue words to identify their similarities and differences? Alright, we have used the transition words while, on the other hand, and similarly. How about you, my dear learners? How will you promote healthy eating habit in the school or in the community? Why is it important to have a healthy eating habit? I'd love to hear your insights, so please include your thoughts in your reflection logs, okay? Now, get your paper and pen and we'll proceed to our today's task. I want you to write your own composition using comparison and contrast pattern. You just need to develop our topic in 2 to 3 paragraphs, of course by using the methods that we have discussed today, and so with the clue words that will guide you in developing your thoughts. And for the topic, please help me decide. Will I eat on a fast food chain or in a fine dining restaurant? Each track will be focusing on various angles. For students under academic track, I want you to discuss on the advantage and disadvantage of eating in a fast food chain and a fine dining restaurant. For arts and design track, focus on the interior design and atmosphere of a fast food chain and a fine dining restaurant. For the sports track, write about the nutrition of food offered from a fast food chain and a fine dining restaurant. And for the TVL track, discuss the services offered by a fast food chain as compared to a fine dining restaurant. You will be graded according to organization, coherence or cohesion, language use, and mechanics. Please do your task immediately after this episode. Will that be okay? And for the next meeting, I will be sharing my feedbacks regarding your output so that you can enhance your writing skills using the comparison and contrast pattern. You've accomplished much of today, students. I do hope that you'll be able to apply what you've learned in this session. Congratulations for that! That ends our meaningful interaction, and I hope that you have learned a lot today. Once again, this is Teacher Eileen, reminding you that it is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. Till next time, my students, bye!